Hey everyone, Story Master here. Welcome back. I know a lot of you put these videos on to fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we begin, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think. Alright, get comfortable, take a slow breath in and out, and let's start tonight's story. I've been a private investigator for 14 years, long enough to recognize the difference between grief that wants truth and grief that wants a villain. Most clients fall somewhere in the middle, and on my good days I can steer them toward whatever's real without letting them drown in what they wish was real. The case started the way plenty of my cases start, a family calling because something doesn't add up. A man in his late 50s, wealthy, twice over rebuilt by divorce and money and stubborn pride, had collapsed in his downtown apartment and died of a heart attack. A tragedy, yes. Also the kind of tragedy that doesn't satisfy anyone left behind. Especially when the man had a girlfriend who was young enough to look like a question mark on two legs. His adult children were the ones who called me. They didn't say, "We want to know what happened." They said what people always say when they've already decided the ending. "We need you to investigate her." They didn't use her name at first. They didn't have to. They described her like she was a headline, early 20s, fitness model, online presence, body for a living. They said their father had been reckless, that the relationship was volatile, that she was exactly the kind of person who would take advantage of someone older and soft in the wrong places. I told them, gently, that heart attacks aren't murder just because the dead man had bad taste. They didn't back down. They offered a daily rate high enough to make most investigators forget the taste of their own conscience. I didn't want to become the kind of man who milks grief because it pays better than truth, so I proposed a limit. I'd work it for 1 week. If I found nothing suspicious, nothing that would stand up in daylight, I'd stop. No extensions unless something real emerged. They agreed immediately. Too quickly. People agree quickly when they're buying confirmation. On paper, the girlfriend didn't look like she'd benefited at all. She wasn't in the will. She hadn't inherited anything. She had her own money, her own income stream, her own audience. She also appeared, at least to anyone watching from a distance, genuinely shaken by the death. Not performative sorrow. Real exhaustion, real hollow eyes, the kind of grief that doesn't know where to stand. If there was poison involved, it would have had to be the kind that disappears without a trace, the kind that belongs to spy novels and not the real world. And yet, 2 details bothered the family enough that they could repeat them without looking at notes. First, their father had moved money. Not small money. Large transfers into a Panamanian account in the months leading up to his death. The account was sheltered, distant, deliberately hard to see into, and the family couldn't identify who controlled it. Second, his relationship with her had been getting worse, fights, breakups, reunions, until the night he died. I started with the financial thread because money is the one thing that remains honest when everyone else lies. The Panamanian account was a dead end in terms of names. The structure did what it was designed to do, obscure. The family had only enough visibility to know the transfers happened, not enough to know who received the benefit. They suspected it was her, but suspicion isn't proof. Suspicion is just a bruise. So I met her. She was exactly what they said she was, young, disciplined in the way people become disciplined when their body is their product, and careful about how she spoke. Not careful like a liar. More like someone who'd learned that a wrong sentence can become a screenshot forever. I asked her about the account. She denied knowing anything about it. I asked if her boyfriend had debts, enemies, anyone who might threaten him. She said no. She said he'd been stressed, yes, but in a normal way, work, age, health. Then she told me something that should have ended the case for me. I loved him, she said, voice flat with fatigue. People don't believe that, but I did. Maybe she did. Maybe she loved him the way you love security, or attention, or the feeling that your life is being funded by someone else's stability. Love has many versions. Some are uglier than others. At that point, I had nothing that justified continuing past my promised week. I could already feel the case turning into exactly what I try to avoid, an expensive grief ritual. Then, on day 5, I got access to the 911 call. I didn't ask for it right away because it's a cruel thing to listen to. It's someone's worst moment turned into audio. But the girlfriend had told the family that everything was a blur, that she couldn't remember parts of the night because she'd been traumatized. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's a shield. Either way, the call would show whether her story matched her panic. It took paperwork and patience, one of those slow, legal drips that make you hate the world, but I got it. The recording was 24 minutes and 37 seconds long. And from the first minute, I felt my skin tighten. Not because she sounded guilty. Because she sounded steady. I've listened to enough emergency calls to know what panic sounds like. Real panic isn't cinematic. It isn't a scream with perfect timing. It's incoherent, it's messy, it's someone forgetting their own last name and then sobbing when they remember. This girl didn't sob. Her voice held one consistent pitch from beginning to end, like she'd placed it on a shelf and refused to let it fall. She described the symptoms clearly: chest pain, sweating, numbness in his left arm, like she was reading from a pamphlet. She answered questions quickly. And then the dispatcher asked for the address. That should have been the easiest part. According to her earlier statements, she'd been at that apartment constantly. It was their place, their routine. She had been there so often that she could have walked the hallway blindfolded. But on that call, when the dispatcher asked her for the address, she behaved like she'd never been there in her life. Not, "I can't remember." Not, "Hold on, let me check." It was more subtle than that: little stalls, vague answers, a refusal to land on specifics. Like she was walking around the truth instead of stepping on it. The dispatcher pressed her. Again. And again. She would give the street, then fumble the number. She would give the building name, then hesitate on the unit. She kept the ambulance floating outside her door in language, never letting it arrive. Eventually, she did provide enough information for emergency responders to show up. But the time it took, those minutes of deliberate vagueness, felt like a decision being made in real time. Then came the CPR instructions. The dispatcher told her what to do. Told her how to position her hands. Told her to start compressions, count them out loud. And she counted. Perfectly. Her voice never moved away from the phone. It never muffled. It never changed with exertion. Anyone who's actually doing CPR sounds different. The breath changes. The voice strains. The phone shifts. There's a rhythm of effort in the sound. Even if someone tries to be calm, their body gives them away. This girl's voice stayed clean, 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 like she was sitting down. Like she was acting the part of saving him. I replayed that section 3 times. By the third listen, I wasn't hearing a frantic girlfriend trying to keep a man alive. I was hearing a woman who understood that the line between help and liability can be measured in recorded seconds. I brought the call to the man's children and played it for them. I didn't tell them what to think. I just watched their faces change as the same details landed. When the call ended, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, his son said what none of us wanted to say. She let him die. Not stabbed. Not poisoned. Not killed in a way that makes the news. Just waited. And that's what made it so unbearable. Because if you can accept that your father was murdered, you can aim your grief at a single act. But if you accept that your father died while someone stood nearby making choices, the grief has no clean target. It becomes a fog. Legally, it was slippery. She didn't have a formal duty to save him. Morally, it was sharp as broken glass. And suddenly the Panamanian account made a new kind of sense. If that money was hers, or if she had access to it, even temporarily, then a heart attack wasn't just a tragedy. It was a moment where she could choose whether he lived long enough to change his mind. The children told me their father had been talking lately about getting things in order. About finances. About regret. About cleaning up loose ends. If he'd threatened to reclaim that hidden money, if he'd suggested closing the account, freezing the transfers, cutting her off, then the incentive wasn't to kill him. The incentive was to do nothing. $1 million doesn't have to buy a murder. Sometimes it only has to buy a delay. The family wanted to pursue it, of course. They wanted to push the truth into a courtroom. But the truth isn't always shaped in a way a court can hold. The girlfriend hadn't administered a toxin. She hadn't left marks. She hadn't done anything with the clean violence people recognize. She'd simply performed a kind of emotional fraud, pretended to be the person calling for help while quietly preventing the help from arriving in time. I told the family what I believed, as carefully as I could. I told them I didn't think she had caused the heart attack. But I told them I believed she had used it. They asked me if that meant she owned the offshore account. I told them I couldn't prove it. When the call ended, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, his son said what none of us wanted to say. She let him die. Not stabbed. Not poisoned. Not killed in a way that makes the news. Just waited. And that's what made it so unbearable. Because if you can accept that your father was murdered, you can aim your grief at a single act. But if you accept that your father died while someone stood nearby making choices, the grief has no clean target. It becomes a fog. Legally, it was slippery. She didn't have a formal duty to save him. Morally, it was sharp as broken glass. And suddenly the Panamanian account made a new kind of sense. If that money was hers, or if she had access to it, even temporarily, then a heart attack wasn't just a tragedy. It was a moment where she could choose whether he lived long enough to change his mind. The children told me their father had been talking lately about getting things in order. About finances. About regret. About cleaning up loose ends. If he'd threatened to reclaim that hidden money, if he'd suggested closing the account, freezing the transfers, cutting her off, then the incentive wasn't to kill him. The incentive was to do nothing. $1 million doesn't have to buy a murder. Sometimes it only has to buy a delay. The family wanted to pursue it, of course. They wanted to push the truth into a courtroom. But the truth isn't always shaped in a way a court can hold. The girlfriend hadn't administered a toxin. She hadn't left marks. She hadn't done anything with the clean violence people recognize. She'd simply performed a kind of emotional fraud, pretended to be the person calling for help while quietly preventing the help from arriving in time. I told the family what I believed, as carefully as I could. I told them I didn't think she had caused the heart attack. But I told them I believed she had used it. They asked me if that meant she owned the offshore account. I told them I couldn't prove it. I've never been shot in the line of work. I've had guns pointed at me, knives flashed at me, and I've watched people's faces change when they realize you're not leaving until you get an answer. But a bullet? No. Still, there was one job where I came so close that, for weeks afterward, I kept waiting to find blood on myself. Like the body didn't quite trust that it had been allowed to continue. The client was a couple who looked older than their own exhaustion. The kind of parents who had slept in shifts for years, because loving an addict turns time into a night watch. Their son, early 20s, had vanished. They'd just gotten him out of rehab. They'd done the meetings, the counseling, the clean starts, all the things that make a family believe in second chances. As a reward for staying clean, they'd bought him a brand new car. He kept it 3 days. Then he sold it back to a dealership for cash and disappeared into the same black hole that had swallowed him before. That detail, selling the car almost immediately, told me everything I needed to know about where this was going. When an addict is truly committed to a relapse, they don't keep assets. They convert them to speed. They turn solid objects into a countdown. I promised the parents I would do what I could, and I meant it. But I also didn't lie to them. I told them that finding him alive was not something I could guarantee. They nodded as if they'd already accepted that possibility and were only paying me to deliver it with proof. I started where I always start: friends, old contacts, and the people who always know more than they claim. I spoke with a couple of his friends from school. I spoke with a girl who used to call herself his girlfriend until she realized the title came with an expiration date. I spoke with two men who had kicked heroin years ago and still carried the habit of watching doors. It didn't take long for one name to repeat. A guy he'd met in rehab. Not a dealer, necessarily, just the kind of person who becomes a doorway back into the lifestyle. A house where the lights are always low and the excuses are always ready. The address was in East LA, a worn neighborhood where people learn to mind their own business because minding someone else's can get you hurt. I drove there on a hot afternoon and parked down the street. The house looked ordinary from the outside: faded paint, a small patch of dry lawn, curtains pulled tight. The kind of place you'd never notice if you weren't looking for it. I approached with the calm walk I use when I don't want to spook anyone. A PI's job is mostly patience. People run when they feel hunted. So you have to look like you're not hunting. As I got closer, I saw movement behind one of the front windows, just a sliver of face through a curtain crack. It was him. I'd studied his photos before leaving the office, before rehab, after rehab, smiling, hollow, healthier, worse. You learn to recognize a person even when the person has been rearranged by chemicals. He was sitting in a computer chair with a blanket over his lap, staring into space with the dead-eyed stillness that comes from too much of something and not enough of everything else. That sight should have been a relief. It should have meant, good, he's here, he's alive, I can bring him home. Instead, I felt something else. Worry. Something about the way he sat didn't look like, hi. It looked like, done. I went to the front door and knocked. Footsteps approached slowly, not rushed. The door opened, and a man stood there, mid-20s or early 30s, thin, jittery, eyes that didn't settle on my face. Yeah, he asked. I introduced myself, kept it simple. I'm a private investigator, I said. His parents hired me. They're worried sick. I need to talk to him. His eyes narrowed immediately. You a cop? No, I said. If I was, you'd already know. That got a small, cautious pause. I kept my voice calm. He's not safe like this, I continued. Relapse after rehab is how people overdose. You know that. Let him come to the door. Let me talk to him. If he doesn't want to go, fine, but at least let me confirm he's breathing and let his parents know he's alive. The man stared at me, weighing something. Behind his shoulder I could smell the house, stale air, sweat, and that faint sour chemical tang that clings to rooms where people chase oblivion. He shook his head. He's not here, he said. I waited a beat, then decided to stop playing polite. I can see him, I said. He's in the front room. His expression changed. Not outrage, more like surprise, and then a flicker of respect, as if I'd proven I wasn't as easy to lie to as he'd hoped. You're bold, he muttered. I'm paid to be, I said. Go get him. He hesitated, then nodded once. Fine, he said. I'll go get him. He closed the door. I stood there listening. I expected footsteps moving deeper into the house. Maybe someone calling out to the kid. Maybe the scrape of a chair. Instead, I heard almost nothing. The silence behind the door felt wrong. Like the house itself was pausing to decide what it was going to do with me. I stepped off the porch and went to the window again, leaning close to the crack in the curtain. The kid was still there. Still slumped in the computer chair, blanket over his lap, staring at the wall. He didn't move at all. And that was when the cold thought finally landed in my head, heavy and certain. He's not ignoring me. He can't move. I walked back to the front door, ready to knock again, ready to be louder, to demand entry, to call an ambulance. I was already forming the sentence in my mouth. Then the world exploded. The door in front of me shattered in a violent burst of splinters. A long, ugly sound ripped through the air, automatic gunfire from inside the house, fired through the door like the shooter didn't care who was standing on the other side. Training takes over in moments like that. You don't decide what to do. Your body decides for you, using habits carved into muscle. I dropped flat onto the ground. My hand went to my sidearm, and I fired back through the door, not because I thought I'd hit anything, but because suppression is sometimes the only thing that keeps you from being cut in half. Wood fragments rained down around me. I remember thinking, very calmly, in the middle of chaos. I'm hit. It felt impossible that I wouldn't be. That many rounds, that close, fired at chest height through a door I'd been standing inches from. I crawled backward off the porch and behind my car, my body acting like it still belonged to me. Then I looked down. No blood. None on my hands. None on my shirt. None pooling on the ground. I couldn't understand it. I called 911 with shaking fingers, describing the shots, the location, the fact that someone had opened fire on me through a front door. Even as I spoke to the dispatcher, I kept checking myself like I'd missed something. Like the wound was hidden. Like the pain simply hadn't arrived yet. Within minutes, sirens. Multiple patrol cars arrived fast, faster than luck usually allows. Officers poured out, taking positions, guns raised, shouting commands toward the house. But the shooter didn't come out. He didn't fire again either. Later, police told me he had fled out the back while everyone's attention was on the front. If he'd chosen to step to a window and fire again, I don't know if I would have kept my miracle. The house was cleared. And then the real horror showed itself. The kid in the computer chair wasn't high. He was dead. He'd overdosed, just like his parents feared, and his so-called friends had tried to deal with it in the dumbest, ugliest way possible. The blanket over his lap wasn't there for warmth. It was there to hide what had been done to him. They had cut his legs. Even typing that now makes my jaw tighten, because it still doesn't feel like something that should exist in the same world as normal afternoons and people walking dogs. The police believed it was an attempt at disposal, a crude, panicked effort to move a body in pieces. A way to get rid of evidence. A way to avoid calling an ambulance and facing questions. The kind of decision people make when their brains are rotten with fear and chemicals. I stood outside while officers carried him out, and I didn't feel like a detective anymore. I felt like a man who had walked into a nightmare by doing his job. The parents arrived later. I wasn't the one who told them. A uniformed officer did. I stayed nearby anyway, because it felt cowardly to disappear. I watched the mother fold in on herself. I watched the father stare at nothing, like he was trying to negotiate with reality and failing. They had believed rehab was the cliff edge, the worst part. They didn't know the worst part can come after hope. In the days that followed, I kept replaying the gunfire. The splinters. The sound of rounds ripping through wood. The certainty that I'd been hit. And the disbelief of finding no blood. I felt ashamed admitting it, even to myself, but there was also a strange exhilaration. A bright, shaking aliveness that made coffee taste stronger and air feel sharper. It wasn't joy. It was adrenaline with nowhere to go. Near death does that. It makes you selfish in the quietest ways. It makes you grateful for your own skin while someone else's family is being destroyed. I tried to be more selective after that case. I told myself that my jar of luck had been emptied too far in one afternoon. But the truth is, I didn't become selective because of bullets. I became selective because of that image in the window. A dead young man sitting upright in a computer chair, facing a wall, hidden under a blanket like the house was pretending he was still alive. And me, standing outside, thinking I'd found him in time. Thinking the job was almost over. Not realizing the job had been over before I ever knocked. I didn't become a private investigator because I missed the glamour of police work. There wasn't any glamour to miss. I became one because I learned, the hard way, that I don't do well with stillness. When I left the job, people congratulated me like retirement was a prize. They talked about mornings without alarms and evenings without callers and weekends that belonged to me again. But the closer I got to it, the more it felt like being asked to sit in an empty room and listen to time passing. So I took work wherever I could find it, and I told myself I was only padding my retirement fund. That was the respectable explanation. The real one was simpler. I needed purpose, even if it arrived disguised as someone else's mess. My first job after leaving the force should have been straightforward. It was, at least on paper. A woman came into the office with her hands folded as tightly as if she could keep her marriage from spilling out by holding it together physically. She said her husband had changed. He used to be a homebody, she said, the kind of man who treated a quiet night in as a reward. Now he was working weekends every week. He came home late. He always had an excuse. And when she called his boss, she found out he hadn't worked a weekend in his life. She didn't want to follow him herself. They only had one car. She didn't want to look desperate. She didn't want to be the wife in a story people laugh about. She wanted certainty. She paid for it. Those cases are common. You learn to approach them without judgment because people don't hire investigators when they feel loved and secure. They hire us when their intuition has become unbearable. I started the way I always do, surveillance. Pattern. Repetition. It didn't take long. He left the house at the same time each work weekend, drove a route he didn't need for anything respectable, and ended up at the same address in Croydon, a two-story house on a rough street where the pavement looked tired and the streetlights felt optional. The first time I saw him park and walk up, I assumed the obvious, mistress. So I staked the place out. I expected a quiet routine. One man enters, one man leaves, maybe a woman appears at the window. Maybe a clandestine exit. The usual shape of hidden life. Instead, I watched a steady trickle of men. Not one or two. Not the occasional visitor. A regular parade. Some arrived alone. Some arrived in pairs, laughing too loudly, like men trying to convince themselves they weren't ashamed. They went in, stayed anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, and left through the back alley entrance like the house had been designed to swallow them discreetly. By the time I'd watched enough to accept it, I felt that familiar dull disappointment that comes when a mystery turns into something ugly and ordinary. It wasn't a mistress. It was a brothel. That was useful information for my client, but it wasn't enough by itself. The wife didn't just want, I think it's a brothel. She needed proof that her husband was there. Proof he wasn't just in the area. Proof he wasn't helping a friend. Proof that he was participating in something he had lied about so consistently that lying had become his weekend ritual. So I needed one of two things. Photographic evidence of him entering or leaving in a way that couldn't be explained away. Or a taped admission, something he said that proved what he was doing. The first option was harder than it should have been because he was cautious. He didn't park directly outside. He knew the street. He knew where eyes could hide. He walked like someone who'd practiced not looking guilty. The second option, an admission, meant getting close. And getting close meant going inside. It's one thing to watch a building from a car. It's another to step into it and smell the truth. I found my way in the same way the customers did, through a human doorway. I followed one of the regulars to a pub later that week, caught him in the smoking area, and let conversation do the work. I didn't push. I didn't pry. I just played the role people will always talk to, lonely, newly divorced, looking for distraction. It didn't take much. There's a certain kind of man who treats secrecy like a social club. Once he believes you belong, he wants to show you the door. He gave me a number and told me to ask for a booking. He even gave me the informal password, like he'd done me a favor instead of dragged me closer to filth. I called. A Scottish voice answered, calm, skeptical, practiced. He questioned me the way people question a threat, gently at first, then sharper if the answers wobble. I used the regular's name several times until the voice finally relaxed enough to let me in. We set a time. I chose a window I believed the husband would be there, because his routine wasn't random, it was ritual. He had patterns. Patterns are what make men feel safe. Still, one thing nagged at me. Unlike most of the other men, the husband stayed for hours. 3. Sometimes 4. Most customers didn't linger. They got what they came for and left, quick and quiet. He didn't. That either meant he was especially indulgent, or he wasn't there for the reason the other men were there. On the day of the appointment, I dressed carefully. Not flashy. Not cheap. Something that said, middle-aged, disposable income, not a cop. I fitted a small camera into the chest pocket of my jacket, one of those devices that looks like a button if you don't know what to look for. Then I drove to Croydon and parked far enough away that my car wouldn't be remembered. The brothel's front door opened by someone who looked like she'd stopped being surprised by men years ago. She checked my name, tested my confidence with a stare, then let me in. Inside, the atmosphere was dim and stale, the kind of air that doesn't fully refresh no matter how often you open windows. The first room was set up like a waiting area, sofa, chairs, cheap decor that tried to look deliberate. Several girls sat around like furniture with heartbeats. Some looked bored. Some looked exhausted. Some looked like they were floating just above their own bodies. It didn't take a genius to see drugs in the room. Not syringes or baggies on the table, nothing that blatant. But the slackness in a jaw, the unfocused stare, the way someone's hands tremble when they try to light a cigarette. Dependency wears patterns too. I stayed longer than necessary, pretending to be indecisive. The goal was to bump into the husband naturally and get him on camera. I assumed, if he was a customer, he would pass through this room. People always pass through the same choke points. It's where you catch them. 45 minutes passed, and I didn't see him. I was beginning to worry he'd come early or use the back entrance when the hostess urged me, politely but firmly, to choose. Lingering too long makes people suspicious. It makes them wonder if you're there to watch instead of pay. So I picked a girl at random, apologized with a fake smile, and let myself be led upstairs. The stairs creaked. The hallway smelled worse. Old carpet holding years of human sweat and disinfectant. And then I saw him. The husband crossed the hallway one floor below, gripping a girl by the arm, not gentle, not playful, but steering her like she was baggage. It happened fast. I didn't even have time to pretend I recognized him from somewhere. But I saw enough, his face, his posture, and the room he entered. That was all I needed. Now I just had to get near that room and get him on film. Upstairs, in the bedroom I'd been led to, I forced myself to play the part for a minute. Small talk, fake charm, the same routine customers use to convince themselves they're still normal. Then I told the girl I needed the toilet. She mumbled directions. There was a bathroom on the 3rd floor, she said, down the hall. I nodded, stepped out, and instead of going toward the 3rd floor bathroom, I went down one level. My heart beat harder the closer I got to his door. I told myself I was prepared. I'd seen plenty in my life. Violence, desperation, the worst of people. Sleaze doesn't usually shock me, just disgusts me. Still, I paused with my hand on the knob. Then I opened the door with a rehearsed, innocent line. "Sorry, is this the toilet?" The scene inside hit me like a slap. He wasn't having sex. He was sitting beside the girl he dragged into the room. She sat in a chair near the window, her arms stretched out, skin pale, expression empty in a way that made my stomach clench. The husband held a syringe like it belonged in his hand. He was injecting her. Not helping her. Not saving her. Hooking her. The girl looked too inexperienced to do it herself. Her hand hovered uselessly, her body tense like she was bracing for the sting. He handled it like routine. Like he'd done it 100 times. And in that instant, the question I'd carried, the reason he stayed for hours, finally had an answer. He wasn't a customer. He was part of the operation. A facilitator. A handler. The kind of man who keeps the girls dependent so they don't run. So they don't think clearly. So they don't get brave. For a second, I just stood there like an idiot, stunned by how wrong I'd been about the whole case. The camera in my pocket was recording, but my brain was slow to remember that. The husband looked up, eyes narrowing, and in 2 steps he was on me. He shoved me out of the room hard enough that my shoulder hit the hallway wall. The door slammed. A lock clicked. For a beat, I stood there with my heart pounding so loud I felt it in my teeth. Then I realized, I had what I needed. Not the mistress footage. Not the adultery. Something far worse. I went back upstairs without returning to the girl I'd paid for. I didn't care about the money at that point. The job wasn't, catch a cheating husband anymore. It was, prove a man is involved in something predatory. I left the building with my hands shaking, not from fear that I'd been caught, but from the sickening realization that some people hide behind normal lives like it's camouflage. Back at the office, I presented the footage to my boss first. We watched it in silence. Then we watched it again, because sometimes the mind refuses to accept the first viewing. When the wife came in, she sat rigidly, ready for the expected kind of betrayal. She was prepared to see him with another woman. Prepared to feel humiliated. Prepared to hate him and still miss him. She wasn't prepared for what we showed her. The moment she realized what he was doing, her expression changed into something I can't easily describe. Not just disgust. Not just anger. Something deeper, like the floor had dropped out and revealed a darker basement beneath her whole marriage. I'd seen people wish for just an affair before, but never as clearly as in that moment. She still wanted a divorce. If anything, she wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. But it wasn't about being rinsed in court anymore. It was about getting away from a man she suddenly realized she didn't know at all. When she left, my boss asked me a quiet question. "You want to call this in?" he asked. I knew what he meant, the police. I looked down at my hands and realized they were still trembling slightly. "Yes," I said. But I also knew the reality. Brothels like that don't collapse just because one investigator walks in with a shaky video. They relocate. They change numbers. They move girls. They find new houses with new curtains. Still, I did what I could. I passed the information to the right people, the way you do when you refuse to become the kind of man who looks away. Later that night, sitting alone, I thought about how the case began, with a wife wanting proof her husband was cheating. And how it ended, with the knowledge that cheating would have been the gentle version of her reality. Some betrayals break hearts. Some betrayals reveal that the person beside you has been feeding other people's daughters into darkness. And that's when you realize, the most dangerous men aren't the ones who look like monsters. They're the ones who look like husbands. Most people assume a private investigator's job is chasing cheaters and snapping photos through long lenses. That's the part they can imagine without getting uncomfortable. What they don't imagine is how often the job turns into a negotiation with fear, quiet, practical fear, the kind that doesn't announce itself until you're already standing in the wrong place. By the time this case came to me, I'd already learned a few lessons the hard way. Don't trespass unless you're prepared for what private property really means. Don't underestimate how fast a crowd turns cruel, and don't assume the police will always arrive in time to make your courage worth it. This job looked harmless. A company suspected one of their employees was faking illness. The man had been calling in sick with a rotating list of excuses: bad back, depression, migraines, yet his absences followed a pattern that screamed something else is paying him. 2 nights a week, always different nights, he'd leave his home and vanish for hours. The client didn't care why. They just wanted proof. I didn't love these assignments, but they were clean money and usually low risk. No domestic violence, no gang politics, no desperate people with nothing left to lose. Just a man caught lying for a paycheck. So I took it. The first week was textbook surveillance. I parked in the right places, blended into the street noise, and let the target write his own schedule. He'd leave around dusk, drive without a clear pattern, then end up, every time, on Dock Road by the industrial yards. The building he visited looked abandoned from a distance: dull metal siding, fenced yard, minimal lighting, and that hollow quiet you get around places where honest work used to happen but doesn't anymore. He'd stay inside for hours, then come out with a thick brown envelope held close to his body. I couldn't see the contents, but I'd seen that kind of posture before. Cash makes people hold their arms differently. After a few nights, I had what I needed to satisfy the client: photos of his car at the location, timestamps, and a clear pattern showing he wasn't too sick to function when the sun went down. But I had a problem. I didn't know what the warehouse was. And if I handed the report over without knowing, I'd be leaving a dark shape in the story. Employers ask questions. Lawyers ask questions. Sometimes you need more than, "He went inside a building." So I did what I shouldn't have done. I decided to take one step closer. Not a dramatic infiltration. Not a Hollywood break-in. Just a peek, walk in, act lost, get a shot or two of him inside, and if confronted, apologize and leave. That was my plan. It was a bad plan. I know that now. I went back on one of his random nights, parked farther away, and approached on foot. The air smelled like wet asphalt and rust. Dock Road at night has a particular emptiness to it: wide spaces designed for trucks and forklifts, not for people walking alone. Before I even reached the building, I heard noise. At first it sounded like distant shouting. Then it sharpened: cheering, laughter, harsh voices layered over something else, something animal. A bark. A yelp. Another bark, lower, more aggressive. I stopped in the shadows, listening. My instincts told me to leave right then. A warehouse that's supposed to be empty doesn't sound like a party. And a party doesn't sound like pain. But I'd already convinced myself I was only having a look. That's how you walk into trouble, not with bravado, but with rationalization. I found a gap in the fence and slipped into the yard. The building's side entrance was partially ajar, like it had been forced once and never repaired. The noise came from inside, louder now, vibrating in my chest. I stepped in. The warehouse was lit with harsh industrial lamps, bright enough to make everything look sickly and pale. Men crowded around something in the center, dozens of them, maybe more, forming a ring of bodies. They weren't dressed like criminals. They looked like regular working-class blokes: hoodies, caps, boots, cheap jackets. The kind of men you pass on a sidewalk and never remember. In the middle was a makeshift arena constructed from metal barriers. And inside that arena were dogs. I didn't see the full fight at first, only flashes through moving shoulders and raised arms. But the sounds told me enough. The crowd's energy wasn't excitement in the normal sense. It was hunger. Then I made the mistake that sealed my night. I lifted my phone. I took a photo. The flash didn't even go off, but someone saw the movement. A head turned. Eyes locked onto me. A shout went up. And in the span of 2 seconds, the crowd's attention shifted like a storm front. I turned to leave. Hands grabbed me from behind. Someone slammed me into a wall. Someone punched my ribs. Someone tore the phone from my hand. I tried to fight back, but there's no clean way to fight when you're outnumbered and you don't know who has what in their pockets. They dragged me toward the pit like I was part of the entertainment now. Up close, the scene was worse. The floor inside the arena was slick, dark, stained. A dog lay dead in the center, still, broken in a way no living thing should be broken. The other dog, alive, panting, shaking with adrenaline, paced at the edge, eyes bright, looking for the next thing to tear. One man shoved my head forward so I could see it properly, like he wanted the image to live behind my eyelids. Someone laughed and said they should throw me in. The others liked that idea too much. They lifted me by my arms, hauled me toward the edge. I felt the heat of the dog's breath as it lunged against the barrier, nails scraping metal. That's when fear stopped being an emotion and became a physical force. I begged, out loud, ugly, without dignity. I offered money. I promised silence. I said whatever came to mind because my mind had narrowed down to one goal: don't become meat. In the middle of that, my body betrayed me. I soiled myself. There's no cleaner way to say it. And as humiliating as it was, it changed everything. Men who enjoy cruelty still have limits when it comes to disgust. They recoiled. They cursed. They dropped me like I'd turned from entertainment into waste. I hit the concrete hard, gasping. They searched me then, quickly and efficiently. Wallet, keys, business cards. When they saw the cards, a few of them exchanged looks. Not panic, calculation. The man I assumed was the ringleader stepped forward, holding my driver's license like he was reading a label. He told me he was keeping it. "So we know where you live," he said, almost casually. Then he leaned close and told me, in a calm voice, that if I spoke about what I'd seen, they'd kill me. That alone was terror enough. But he wasn't done. He shifted into something that felt worse because it was creative. He started asking questions: who hired me, how much they were paying, what I was hoping to get. I answered because lying felt pointless and because I was still trying to keep my breathing steady. He nodded, reached into his pocket, and counted out cash into my hand. Then he said the line I still hear sometimes when I'm half asleep. "You work for me now." And before I could process what that meant, he explained it in the simplest possible way: I was to cancel the job. I was to stop watching the warehouse. I was to pretend I never saw anything. And if police ever showed up near Dock Road, or if he even suspected I'd talked, he'd come to my house and iron my chest. A clothes iron. He said it like it was a joke that only he understood. I stared at him, and in his eyes I saw something cold and satisfied, not just a man protecting a secret, but a man enjoying the fact that he'd planted a picture in my head I couldn't easily remove. They shoved me out. No dramatic chase. No final punch. Just a firm hand on my shoulder pushing me toward the exit like they were done with me now, like I was a problem they'd solved. Outside, the night air felt too clean. I stumbled back to my car with bruises blooming under my skin and a tightness in my chest that didn't feel like pain. It felt like the aftermath of realizing how close I'd come to dying in a place nobody would ever admit exists. I canceled the job the next day. I didn't take payment for my hours. I didn't argue. I didn't even tell the client the whole truth. I told them I couldn't continue and advised them to handle it internally. Then I sat in my house for nights afterward, listening to every car that passed too slowly, wondering if someone was outside with a hot iron in a bag. No one came. But the threat did its job anyway. It rewired my instincts. It made me more cautious. It made me understand that sometimes the most dangerous part of a case isn't the proof you collect. It's the moment you realize the wrong people now know your address. I wasn't hired for field work at that firm. Not at first. The others were the ones who sat in cars for hours, who tailed cheating spouses through traffic, who knocked on doors with practiced smiles and measured lies. I was the odd piece in the set, the one who could pull information out of the internet the way a locksmith pulls pins out of a stubborn door. Most clients don't understand that side of the job. They think the internet is either Google or nothing. They don't realize there are layers of digital life people never see unless someone goes looking with the right tools and the wrong amount of patience. That's why my boss called me into the office on a morning when I usually worked from home. The text was short: "Come in. Private meeting. Client insists." When I arrived, my boss led me to a small room at the back, one of those windowless meeting rooms where voices feel too loud. A woman sat at the table, hands folded, posture straight, face composed in a way that looked rehearsed. She was striking. Not just pretty. Deliberate. The kind of person who understands how quickly a first impression can become leverage. My boss introduced us, then sat quietly as the woman explained what she wanted. It sounded simple. "I need you to find everything you can about someone," she said. "That's what we do," I replied, already thinking about the usual: old addresses, social accounts, archived posts, relatives, public records, past employers. Then she added, calmly, "The person is me." That's not a request you hear often. People hire investigators to find exes, stalkers, missing relatives, anonymous harassers. They don't usually hire you to excavate their own life. If they do, it's because they're scared of what's already out there, or because they're trying to measure how exposed they are before someone else does. I asked the obvious question: why? She said she was a teacher. She said her reputation mattered. She said she'd made mistakes online when she was younger, and she wanted to know what could still be found, what could be pulled up, screenshotted, weaponized. That was plausible. Schools are brutal about optics. Parents are brutal about rumor. A single old photo can become a headline if the right person hates you enough. So I agreed to take the case. For the first couple of days, it was almost boring. Her public footprint was clean. Social media accounts were scrubbed. Old usernames went nowhere. No embarrassing posts, no wild party pictures, no obvious contradictions between the responsible professional she claimed to be and the person she might have been years ago. If anything, she looked too clean. That's often a sign someone has been tidying in a panic. Most people have digital lint in the corners, old forum comments, forgotten handles, a tagged photo they never noticed. When there's nothing, it's either because they lived like a ghost, or because they've already paid someone to bury their tracks. By day 3, I should have written a short report and collected my fee. But the job didn't sit right with me. The client wasn't relieved by my early findings. She wasn't grateful. She kept asking the same question in different forms. How deep can you go? What would someone really determined be able to find? What about places that aren't indexed? That's when I understood what she actually wanted. She didn't want a report. She wanted a stress test. She wanted to know if her secrets would hold. So I went deeper. Not with magic. With method. I started cross-referencing images, small details most people ignore, backgrounds, reflections, patterns on walls, the kind of objects that repeat across photos because people don't think they matter. I ran archived searches, cached content, old username trails, forgotten domains. I followed tiny threads the way you follow a hairline crack in plaster until you realize the whole wall is about to come down. And eventually, something did come down. Not a scandal in the way most people mean it. A doorway. I found a page that wasn't indexed by normal search engines. It didn't advertise itself. It didn't want casual visitors. It was built like a private club, a front door with no sign outside, and a lock that only opened if you already knew where to knock. The site had a paywall. Cryptocurrency only. No names. No addresses. No customer support. Just a clean, cold design meant to feel professional, which is exactly what criminals do when they want their customers to feel safe. At first, it looked like a content subscription site, exactly the kind of thing that exists everywhere now. But the deeper I went, the less it looked like content, and the more it looked like a marketplace. It was selling information. Not public information. Not Googleable information. Personal data packaged neatly into downloadable files, docs packets, identity bundles, background dossiers, proof of life photos, private phone numbers, workplace schedules, family links. Everything a stalker or an extortionist would need, organized like a menu. And the face attached to the site, the branding, the aesthetic, the persona, was her. Not her legal name, not her public profile as a teacher. A curated online version of her, stylized photos, a soft voice in short clips, a carefully constructed, private life, designed to make subscribers feel like they were being let into something forbidden. The worst part wasn't the site's existence. The worst part was realizing it wasn't created to attract random strangers. It was created to attract a certain kind of buyer, someone who didn't want adult entertainment. Someone who wanted power. Access. Control. Someone who wanted the ability to ruin a person quietly. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, feeling that familiar internal shift, the moment a case stops being interesting and starts being dangerous. Because a site like that doesn't run on one person's choices. It runs on networks. On suppliers. On people who know how to steal data from places that aren't supposed to leak. On people who understand how to stay hidden long enough to get rich. I gathered what I could without taking anything I didn't need. Screenshots of the structure. Proof the site existed. Proof it was linked to her persona. Enough to explain the danger without becoming part of it. Then I called my boss and told her I needed a private meeting, with no client present. When I showed her what I'd found, she didn't speak for a long time. Finally she asked, "Are you sure it's her?" I nodded. "The persona is hers," I said. "Whether she built it or someone built it around her, different question. But she's tied to it." My boss asked the next question, the one that matters in our line of work. "What do we do now?" The answer should have been simple. Report it. Cut ties. Contact the proper authorities. Protect ourselves. But the client was waiting outside the room, and I already knew what kind of conversation was coming. People don't hire investigators to test their own secrets unless they expect those secrets to be found. When we brought her in, she sat down like she'd been rehearsing her face in a mirror. I didn't accuse her immediately. I gave her the chance to react like an innocent person would react: shock, confusion, fear. Instead, she reacted like someone receiving a medical diagnosis they'd already suspected. She exhaled slowly. "So you found it," she said. It wasn't a question. I asked her why she hired us. She said she wanted to know if the site could be traced back to her. She said she wanted to know if anyone else could find it. She said she needed to know what her risk was. I asked again, because in my experience, people answer differently when you refuse to let them hide behind vague words. "Why?" Her eyes flicked to my boss, then back to me. And then she told the truth in the way liars do, not fully, but enough to reveal the shape of it. She said she wasn't the only one involved. She said she'd signed contracts. She said she'd been paid. She said she didn't control what the subscribers did with the information. She said she was just the face. Just the branding. Just the lure. A human logo. She also said something that made my stomach turn, because it was the kind of logic you only hear from someone who has practiced it until it feels normal. If it wasn't me, she said, it would have been someone else. That's the phrase people use when they want to make evil sound inevitable. I told her we were terminating the contract. She didn't argue about the money. She didn't plead. She just asked one question, quiet and precise. How did you find it? That was the moment everything snapped into focus. She hadn't hired us to remove the site. She hadn't hired us to stop the criminals behind it. She hadn't hired us because she feared for her reputation. She'd hired us to learn our method. To learn what worked. So she, and whoever she answered to, could patch the leak. I didn't tell her how I found it. Not because I wanted to be mysterious. Because some knowledge is a weapon, and you don't hand a sharper blade to someone you wouldn't trust with a spoon. She stared at me a long time, then stood up, smoothing her coat like the meeting had been a polite business lunch. At the door, she paused and looked back. "You're good at what you do," she said. It wasn't praise. It was assessment. After she left, my boss locked the door and sat down hard. We had proof of something ugly, but proof isn't safety. Proof can make you a target. We did what we could without becoming reckless. We documented. We escalated it through the proper channels. We tightened our own security. We warned the people we could warn without tipping off the wrong ears. And for a long time afterward, every unknown number that called my phone felt like a hand reaching through the screen. That case didn't end with a dramatic arrest in front of my eyes. It didn't end with a neat confession. It ended with the realization that the internet doesn't just store people's memories. It stores their vulnerabilities. And if someone builds a marketplace for those vulnerabilities, they don't need guns or knives to destroy lives. They just need subscribers. Liverpool's docks don't sleep, they just change shifts. At night the water takes on that oily shine, the kind that makes every reflection look like a lie someone rehearsed. She called herself Nadia. Not her real name, she said, but at least she admitted it up front, an honest lie, which is still a kind of honesty. We met in a cafe that stayed open late for students and insomniacs. She picked a table where she could see the door and the street at the same time. People who've been scared for long enough always do. "I don't need you to find a person," she said. "I need you to find the version of me that's ruining my life." I've heard that line before. Usually it means blackmail. Sometimes it means addiction. Occasionally it means someone has a better copy of your identity than you do. "What's happening?" I asked. She slid her phone across the table. An Instagram account. Her face. Her voice in reels. Her mannerisms. Her jokes. Her followers, too many for a fake built by a bored teenager. The profile was clean, consistent, and cruelly believable. "And this is you?" I asked. "No," she said. "But it's using my old photos. Photos I never posted. Photos only a few people had." A deepfake can be sophisticated. A stolen private archive is simpler, and far more personal. I asked for the basics, who had access, who would benefit, what had changed recently. She hesitated, then said, "I'm a teacher." Again with the teachers. Reputation isn't just currency in that job. It's oxygen. The fake account wasn't just posting harmless content. It was flirting with students. Hinting at meetings. Dropping suggestive jokes that, taken alone, might be dismissed, but together formed a pattern that looked like grooming. That's how you destroy someone professionally, not with a single accusation, but with a trail of maybes that feel too ugly to ignore. "Has anyone confronted you?" I asked. "My headmaster," she said. "He didn't accuse me. He just asked if I was okay. Like you'd ask someone who's already falling apart." I nodded. Give me everything, I said. Emails, screenshots, the earliest date you noticed it. She did, and I took the case. The first thing I learned was that the impersonator understood timing. Posts went up during her teaching hours, when she couldn't be online to deny them quickly. Comments were answered fast, fast enough to look like a real person, slow enough to feel human. I traced the account's engagement patterns. I looked at who boosted it early, who showed up in every comment section like a loyal audience. 3 usernames stood out. All created within the same week. All following each other. All praising the fake Nadia with the same tone, too consistent, too supportive, like they were paid to be her friends. A small thing. But crime often begins as a small thing that repeats. I messaged one from a burner account with a simple lure, "Hey, how did you find this page?" The reply came back in minutes, "Private invite. You want in?" That was interesting. Because I didn't want in. I wanted to know who was running the door. I pushed gently. Asked where the invite came from. The account sent me a Telegram handle. That narrowed it. The impersonator wasn't just playing on social media. They were using it as an entrance to something else, some private group, some marketplace, some funnel where a teacher scandal wasn't a tragedy, but a product. Telegram is where a lot of modern blackmail lives, channels, bots, paywalls, and the comforting illusion that disappearing messages mean disappearing consequences. I contacted Nadia with a plan. We'd run a controlled sting, not heroic, not cinematic. Just careful. Step 1. Create a decoy. A fake, concerned parent persona. Step 2. Follow the Telegram handle. Step 3. See what the blackmailer offered and how they priced it. I don't like stings. They put you inside the enemy's rhythm. But sometimes you can't understand the mechanism until you watch it move. The Telegram handle led to a group with a bland name, Local Community Updates. The kind of title that could mean anything. Inside it, the posts were news, screenshots of scandals, half-confirmed rumors, unverified accusations. Each post came with a link, full proof here. The link didn't go to a news site. It went to a paywall. Crypto only. And the product wasn't pornography. It wasn't anything supernatural, or secret society nonsense. It was raw, weaponized private life. Leaked phone backups. Docs packets. Private photos packaged as evidence. Edited chat logs with just enough truth inside them to feel authentic. The business model was simple: sell outrage, sell access, sell proof, then upsell the next scandal to the same hungry audience. It wasn't about sex. It was about control, using moral panic as a subscription service. I didn't purchase anything. I'm a private investigator, not a customer. But I collected what I could legally: group links, admin handles, timestamps, and the path that connected Nadia's fake account to the paywall funnel. Then I did the boring work, the real work. I mapped the Telegram admins' usernames across platforms. Most were dead ends, but one made a mistake. The same handle appeared on a local buy-sell forum 3 years earlier, offering phone unlocking services and account recovery for cash. That isn't a service. That's a confession in a cheap suit. I dug into the forum posts and found an email. From the email, an old leaked password. From the password, a reused login on another site. From there, a real name. A man named Callum Vane. Not a mastermind. Not a genius. Just competent enough to be dangerous and lazy enough to get caught eventually, if someone cared enough to keep pulling the thread. The address attached to him led to a small office above a phone repair shop near the edge of the city. The sign downstairs said, "Screen Fix." Upstairs, the windows were always closed. I don't break into places. I don't have to. People break into themselves all the time when you let them talk. I went in during the day and acted like a customer. The phone repair clerk downstairs was bored and underpaid. I asked if the upstairs office was that data recovery guy. He nodded without thinking. I asked if he was in today. He shrugged. I asked if he did account stuff. He smirked and said, "Depends what you mean." That was enough. The next move wasn't mine. It was Nadia's. I told her we had a likely operator, and that the best way to pressure a blackmailer wasn't to threaten them, it was to show them you could expose their infrastructure. They don't fear anger. They fear disruption. Nadia, to her credit, didn't want revenge. She wanted her life back. We sent a formal notice from the firm, cease and desist, preservation demand, evidence log, and a warning that law enforcement and platform compliance teams would receive the full packet if content wasn't removed and the funnel dismantled. The letter wasn't magic. It was leverage. That evening, the fake Nadia account posted a final story, a black screen with white text. "Stop digging." And then it vanished. People think that's the end. The villain disappears, credits roll, the detective lights a cigarette and becomes a silhouette. Real life is uglier. Because 2 days later, Nadia's headmaster called her again, this time not gently. A printed folder had been delivered to the school office. No return address. Inside, screenshots of the fake posts, plus proof that Nadia had admitted everything in a private chat. The confession was fake. But it looked real enough to survive a staff meeting. That's when I understood what Callum was doing. He didn't just want clicks. He wanted a controlled detonation. If the online funnel got shut down, he still needed a payoff. So he moved offline, where there are fewer logs, fewer compliance departments, fewer automated takedowns. He escalated. And escalation is a mistake detectives can use. I told Nadia to take a leave from school immediately and to speak with a solicitor. Then I asked for something she didn't expect. "Do you have a copy of the folder?" She did. Paper has fingerprints. Printers have microscopic patterns. Delivery routes have cameras. And whoever assembled that folder had to touch the real world, had to pick a time, a place, a method. I checked the prints on the documents. Not with a lab, I don't have that luxury, but with simple logic. The pages had slight alignment shifts and a repeating faint banding. Cheap printer. Likely inkjet. And the staple was a specific type used by a few local stationery wholesalers. Not proof. But direction. I asked the school office for their CCTV around delivery time. They didn't want to cooperate at first. Schools hate scandal even when they're the victim. But a solicitor's letter changes the temperature in a room fast. The footage showed a courier. Helmet, reflective jacket, head down. No face. But the bike had a unique scratch pattern on the rear rack and a bright green zip tie wrapped around the frame. A stupid little signature. I spent the next day near the phone repair shop and watched. At 6:40 p.m., a courier bike with a bright green zip tie rolled into the alley behind it. The rider went inside, not the repair shop, but the side door that led upstairs. I didn't follow him in. I didn't need to. I took photos. I logged time. I called the solicitor. The solicitor contacted police. That's where my part of the story ends in the cleanest way it can. I'm not a cop. I don't kick doors. I don't handcuff people. I hand people evidence and let the system do what it can. But before I left, I watched the upstairs window. The blinds twitched. Someone was watching me watch them. And that's the last lesson every modern case eventually teaches. If someone can build a second version of you online, they can also build a version of you that looks like the villain. So you don't just chase them. You document everything, because the only thing worse than being targeted is being rewritten.